at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master.
So hi, I'm Wilfred Reilly. Welcome to yet another episode of the Cut the Bull podcast. As always, I'm joined by my lovely and talented co-host, Brooks Crenshaw, and my other lovely and talented co-host, Christy Kelly. And today we're welcoming Professor Nick Wolfinger of the University of Utah, who is a well-known expert on a range of things. He's discussed marriage. He's discussed the family in America. I have a lot of questions to ask him about that. But whose most recent book is Professors Speak Out, the Truth About Campus Investigations. So he's looking at some of the things that have gone on the American university campus over the past entertaining couple of years that we've had. Nick, I always throw out a kind of softball first question. What's the book about? What's happening to these academic professors here in the USA?
The rate of professors being investigated has skyrocketed according to the best data we have over the last couple of decades. And there have been a lot of books about higher education, but no books like mine that were anthologies of stories by people investigated for all sorts of different things. And one of the common threads you get in reading the book is that the investigation is the punishment in most of the cases.
Okay, that's an interesting line. The investigation is the punishment. That applies to a lot of things. I mean, I think of the back and forth allegations made during divorce cases. I mean, whoever wins, if someone says you're a rapist or former prostitute or an alcoholic, I mean, you're gonna carry that in your community for a while. But just for the audience who might not be aware, what are some of the things that faculty members are being investigated for? Who does the investigating also?
Good question. So I should say that certainly there is genuine misbehavior on campus. There are still sexual assaults on campus. There are still faculty and administrators abusing their positions of power. No one's saying that these people shouldn't be investigated. But however, what you have often is a situation where there's an allegation of misconduct in campus, and then you get to a situation where university bureaucrats are investigating what are felonies that the cops should be investigating. Remember Larry Nassar from Michigan State, the multiple rapist who's now in jail for the rest of his life? Mm-hmm. Before he was finally charged and convicted, a campus investigation, he had undergone a Title IX campus investigation, and he was exonerated. So certainly bad stuff happens on campuses and it should be investigated. What's happening increasingly is professors investigated for their speech, or professors investigated because the university wants to harass them and perhaps force them out. That was true in my case. Sometimes investigation is deployed as a weapon by one faculty member against another. So some investigations, there's faculty politics continued by another means.
Yeah, I'm not particularly surprised by that. So Brooks Crenshaw, you are currently a college faculty member. In fact, Brooks has jumped on at K-State to do some teaching in the business department. What do you think about this? I mean, you actually have a pretty serious business and political background. You worked for the Bevan administration. What do you think about kind of the university kangaroo court process? Is that something you're at all worried about? Students alleging something? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's obviously a worry. I mean, given Nick's, teeing it up, and of course, I've got some, major cases in recent history that spring to mind. The big ones. And Nick, you've probably got a lot more than these, but like Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein at Evergreen, like those were figures that actually the investigation somewhat backfired because it propelled them into the public eye, and they had something to say. So, but for should that befall me, but for that outcome, I mean, say what you mean and let the chips fall where they may. So. I think it's extrajudicial, and with Nick's example here that he's exonerated, but then, the real court finds him guilty. So yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, Christy Kelly, you're a lawyer by background. I don't want to risk misgendering, but you also appear to be a woman. What do you think about this campus environment? Well, you'll have rape cases or mutual DV cases handled by someone in the Nick, what would the title even be? It's not the HR office on campus. What's the Title IX office maybe at your school?
So at my school, it's the Office of Equal Opportunity hyphen something else. It's a long, complicated office. Some campuses have dedicated to HR Title IX departments. Some it's just it's a smaller department that investigates all misconduct on campus. So the names of the bureaucrats vary.
Yeah, all right. But so, Christy, I mean, just as a professional in this field, what do you think about this? Someone with a BA in HR judging
I mean,
you?
I think it's complicated. So I think like historically we've seen, especially like with the rape cases, where it's kind of been a sweep under the rug thing in favor of the university. So definitely for, serious rape cases. I mean, I do have a college age daughter, and, the first thing that I would do is bypass the university system and just, file a police report, right? If something, her or her friends, God forbid, something were to happen. But I think in other cases, I worked a long time ago as an ombudsman for a major university in California. And I know I'm getting old.
I've had this job, actually.
Yeah, I've had this job. And it was actually a good thing the way that the University of California had it set up. Because if you had a situation where a student, faculty member, whoever had a complaint, it was kind of the first stop, right? The first stop to, hammering out grievances before it got to somebody's record or before it got to the next step. It was, okay, do we have a misunderstanding? Can we sit down? Can we talk about it? Can we come to some type of, disagreement? At the school that you worked at, was there an ombudsman's office? Was there kind of like an informal process before it actually kind of hit your record and official investigation?
So nominally there was, and in fact, my third out of three investigations, the university did engage in quote unquote informal negotiations, but it was in bad faith. And by the end of that, the dean or vice president posing as the informal mediator then just joined the prosecution. I would add, though, that even that is too far. Let me give you an example. So let's take something really mild, like the professor used profanity and a student was offended. So in the old days, and in an ideal world, this might just be resolved by the professor's chair calling him in and saying, hey, there's reports of you using profanity. You should dial it down a bit, or at least for the semester, and the professor might say, sure, and that's the end of it. Now, it will be promoted to a complaint handled by a separate campus office. And that, to me, is a sign that I should get an attorney because it's serious. And once I've paid out thousands of dollars for a retainer, then it's enacting what I mean when I say the punishment is often worse than the crime, because then even if nothing comes of it, it still costs me thousands of dollars. So for really small ball stuff, it would be great to see more very informal resolution at the level of chair or dean. My third investigation indeed was in 2020 over a tweet. Could have been handled just that way, but it wasn't.
But just a quick follow-up. We have to get to your investigations and why you were on number 3. But before we get there, I would say the correct way to set up an ombudsman's office is not for it to flow through the dean. So the ombudsman's office should be totally separate, keep its own records, and only report to the dean chancellor, but it doesn't necessarily flow through the dean's office, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm curious to hear about these
Sure.
these investigations.
Sure. Happy to share with you if you want. Yeah, I think that would be great if there were an ombudsman who, were at that point it just didn't loom as something potentially career threatening that might impel one to hire an attorney. So you want to hear about the investigations?
Yeah.
So I think I should start by saying I had a rough tenure case. And I had a rough tenure case just because I had a colleague who didn't like me for personal reasons. And so what happened was my department, even though I had, published a ton and met the criteria in every other way, this department still voted 6-5 to tenure me, but 3-6 against promotion. Now, this was reversed at every level of the university above me, my chair, my dean, the college committee, and it goes through a lot of levels because when you tenure someone, you're making a lifetime commitment. But every time it topped a level, I had to write another memo. And so, this was a exhausting and embittering experience. And the university continued to deny me for promotion to full professor the first time. Finally, it promoted me in 2014, and I thought I was done with it until 2 years later, I got word that I was facing a sexual misconduct complaint. It didn't even say that. It said an Office of OEO and a bunch of other letters complaint, and I had no idea what that meant. And so the guy I talked to said, "You have to come in for a meeting." And I said, "Nope, I'm out of state. I can't come in for a meeting," which I was. And I said, "Can I have the written, can I have the written document complaint?" And he said, "We don't really do that." And I said, "I'm out of state. That's all that can happen." And so finally he relented and sent it to me. So later I learned that faculty are invited in for meetings and they're not told what the allegations are against them. They're just encouraged to talk and thereby incriminate themselves. So we have a process that's, very alien to Western jurisprudence. So when I finally got the charges, I was equally amused and perplexed. Here's the one I've talked about the most because it's the most risible. I was a colleague had alleged that I had told her and some of my other colleagues that I had proposed to my wife, now long since ex-wife, at a strip club. That's it. Are you scandalized?
The pearls are clutched. Next.
Yes. So this was in. That was one of the allegations, and I later assumed, pretty much concluded that this was the same person who had tried to get me denied for tenure, just figuring out another way she could harass me. So there's some allegations of potty mouth on my behalf. There were some really sort of arbitrary allegations of gender bias. For example, I shared in a faculty meeting, I said, their publication record isn't strong. It said, "You said this because it was a woman and you were being sexist." It was nuts. And the most ominous was a reporter who had allegedly called my department to complain about me. What was the complaint? I don't know. Who was the reporter? I don't know. I study marriage and divorce and sex. I've talked to hundreds of reporters. Was there even a reporter? I don't know. That's all I ever learned. But anyone can call any university and get a complaint filed against anyone. So, Will, if you're mean to me in this pod, watch out.
I actually had this happen recently, and at K-State, we're pretty laid back. We were a smaller institution. We're historically black college, so it didn't lead to anything. But some damn fool actually called the school. They read my comment on the Gaza war on Twitter. And this wasn't even one of my more pro-Israel comments. I just said, if you're looking logically at this, I mean, both parties could easily be accused of war crimes. This is what a war crime is. I actually have a legal background. And some guy, I guess on the Palestinian side, contacted the university and claimed they were a Middle East researcher or some such shit. I got to hear the call and said that I'm saying very provocative, I think it was, things online. And my chair, who I don't really need the name for this, but just came and said, well, maybe tone it down a little, but this doesn't seem to be a legal matter. We're unable to, figure out who this guy is. But yeah, I mean, anyone can call a public institution. This actually, I've been a boss. We've all been bosses. And this is one reason I don't take anons seriously at all. I mean, if someone were to message me and say, hey, one of your guys or one of the business women working for you did this terrible thing to me, September 9, 2004, I mean, my comment would quite literally be, well, you're going to have to identify yourself and come in or go to the police. Like that doesn't mean anything at all. But yeah, I actually have had that happen. And fortunately, I'm in a friendly environment. I'm well liked in the community, but it's something that can occur.
The University of Utah accommodates the laziest of accusers who could pull down menus to identify what kind of discrimination you're alleging or someone is guilty of. It's nuts. Right now, so you're liked, so it didn't go anywhere. Now, imagine a university already has an axe to grind against someone. They may run with that, right?
Yeah, I've actually been, I don't want to say surprised, but I mean, I'm a right-leaning business consultant. And I mean, I've found my environment to be pretty pleasant. But I guess, again, if your leadership team is all Black Americans and they span the political gamut, it's a little hard to kind of put the Nazi label on any of the Black men in the room. But I have a follow-up, a very quick question that I want to toss like 4 or 5 in a row to Christy and Brooks. But actually, I'm going to direct this question to Christy first, then to you, Nick. But I am not a practicing lawyer, but I've read through some of the university codes around, say, sexual violence and harassment. And these are things we all take very seriously. But it strikes me that the definitions are just complete bullshit. They include things like hooking up only on the male side after 3 drinks at, let's say, a group of solid research 2 universities in Kentucky. You don't have much of a right to confront your accuser. It's nonsense from any normal legal standpoint. My response would be to show up in the hearing with a lawyer, probably. But I mean, it seems like a lot of people, at least 80% males, are kicked out of school, so on the basis of this. Christy, what do you think of the existence of these kind of pseudo-legal systems around the country? This exists with HR and a lot of companies. How should people respond if they get in these situations? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, ever since, the Me Too, and is that Gloria Allred? I think she's the one that did it. I mean, I'm really frustrated with that whole movement, especially, the older cases are bringing those back. Don't even get me started on those, but let's just start with this right here. It's very difficult for a young man, especially even on a college campus, to even really know how to comport himself nowadays, because how is he supposed to know, what's acceptable, what's not, what if she's drinking, how am I to know if she, you almost want to bring out a piece of paper and have her sign like a consent form nowadays. I mean, honestly, it's getting almost to that.
Encourage this, actually. I hate to interrupt, but on video. Like it's the craziest, least romantic.
A contract every base.
But I mean,
you talking about affirmative consent?
If I were a normal lady-like woman with my shirt off, and some guy walked up to me with a phone and is like, "Okay, I'm going to take you through a step-by-step contract process," I'd be like, "Nah, we're waiting a couple more dates here."
You've already blown it if her shirt's off and you haven't started the steps, Will.
Fair enough. But
this was a thing. This was a thing in the '90s, I think, at Antioch College, and everyone made fun of them. But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have boys. I have, 3 daughters. One's grown, another one's in college right now, and the other one's right behind her. But if I did have a son, especially if he was like an athlete and, like a star student, I'd be like, you need to get that girl on film. Seriously, if you don't know her, which first of all, you should know her, but it's college. If you don't know her, get her on film. Bring out a piece of paper, and I am not kidding. I would be that mom drilling that into my son, because it's scary nowadays. And I'm sympathetic on this one to the men, to the young men, because it really is difficult in knowing how to comport yourself in different scenarios.
It also, I'm sympathetic to both, actually, very briefly. Like, it seems like so first of all, frankly, like in actual rape cases where there's like abusive violence, you're terrified to come forward, the conviction rate's under 10%. Like, that's something you see in every data set. The flip side is now there's this alternative set of cases that aren't prosecutable in the real world at all, but that exist on the campus, where someone will literally excuse the language, grab you by the dick and drag you into a bedroom. This is an actual case that occurred. And then later say, I regret that. I consumed
Literally
2 more
grabbed by
drinks.
the dick?
What's up?
Literally grabbed by the dick and dragged by his dick into the bedroom.
Not like dragged by. I mean, I don't know how that would work, but no, like there have been multiple cases. A friend of mine, for example, is a defense lawyer. One of the, you couldn't charge this as a rape case in his state, Georgia, but one of the sexual assault cases he prosecuted involved a college-age man where a woman initiated sex with him, got on top of him, had sex with him, and then later made the claim, well, I think it was 3 more drinks than he did, whatever the standard was on campus and in the state, and pressed felony charges. So I think there's that, which is almost totally distinct. It's like the distinction between an actual homeless veteran and a hustler in downtown Nashville or Chicago. I think that's almost totally distinct from people that are in long-term abusive relationships, actually being sexually abused, so on. So it's hard to know what to do about that as a guy. Yeah. Brooks, what do you think?
I think we're stunting both sexes at a particular age, between the screens and social. Yeah, I think we're really doing harm. I don't think we know the cost yet of improperly on-ramping the technology of screens and social. Whether you're talking about the, increase in neuroticism to the toaster fucker problem that Will has pointed out, essentially the concentration of psychopaths, the people with the weird.
Well, why don't you explain the toaster fucker problem? You've
Well, so the notion that someone who is sexually attracted to a toaster before social media, that person was ostracized, rightly so, and told to get back to work and quit being weird. But now they all find each other, and now there's this whole scale community of, fringe and
Weirdos.
And I think the danger is really the psychopaths, right? Like psychopaths used to have to move from place to place because, the community men had the wherewithal to run them off. And now they have this virtual concentration. And I don't know what cost we're going to pay for those things that are being exacerbated in the long run. I have some concerns about how we on-ramp to LLMs, but I think we have failed that. And I think that in doing so, on top of COVID, like all the kids in school for that period of time, like I really think we've set a lot of kids back in a really bad way.
The sex cases exploded because of some disastrous guidance issued by the Obama Department of Education in 2011. And so they basically succumbed to activists and rewrote the rules. Previously, sexual harassment had to be pervasive and severe under guidance issued during the Clinton administration. There was the theory that there were a few bad apples on campus that needed to be caught. So this was all thrown out in 2011, where the problem was deemed endemic. Colleges were deemed to have rape culture. And so the definition to be used for sexual misconduct went from pervasive and severe to any unwanted conduct. But probably the worst thing of all were the perverse incentives put in place. Colleges were given rules for how they should get started addressing allegations of sexual misconduct, and then they were threatened if colleges didn't try to ferret these out with sufficient vigor. They were threatened with compliance reviews, which would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and ultimately with the possibility of inclusion on a federal blacklist and loss of federal funds, although that never happened. What this did was create an incentive for colleges to investigate everything, no matter how frivolous, be it allegations of a strip club wedding proposal to a guy, at Brandeis who claimed that his boyfriend had kissed him while he was asleep and he couldn't consent. That guy was actually suspended from college for a semester, but we know about it because there was legal filings, and of course that was laughed out of court. And so that's what we started to see, or like the Howard professor who was investigated for over 500 days because of his test question involved bikini waxing.
Yeah, and
Wow.
one
In other words,
important point
bullshit.
I think you made
Yeah.
there briefly is that none of this has very much to do with the actual law. I mean, there's generally a level of assumed
Yeah.
consent in relationships. So, I mean, if in practice you kiss your wife at night, you're not going to jail for the young men listening. But there are these secondary systems in the country where this is a genuine risk. And a lot of this, Nick, I'm interested in your opinion as a sociologist, as someone who writes in this field. But a lot of this seems to reflect sort of the radical feminist idea that all sex is pretty close to rape, or that normal male-female relations are bad. So you should distrust people. If there's a party full of men pursuing women, you should assume the worst
A
there.
woman or a bear.
Yeah, well, Brooks,
I mean-
actually, let's flip to you for a second. I mean,
Yeah.
you had a good point on this about the screen tech, but doesn't the problem go deeper than this? That when you look at, you've written about this almost philosophically. When you look at kind of the manosphere versus the radical feminists, they're starting from a point of, we're competing with this enemy group. The goal is
Right.
to get as much sex or money or whatever as possible, and then kind of dip out and go back to the good people. And that seems like something that's really deeply unproductive if you're trying to get married and have 2.5 kids. Brooks, what's your take there?
Well, I mean, yeah. So Nick described it well. During the Obama administration, a bureaucrat pulled a lever, and suddenly the incentives changed, and you just had this wave of cases. This strikes me like woke Sharia court. It's parallel to our legal system, but it's pseudo-religious. And a lot of this speaks to the notion that, the Peterson idea of the 4x4, or the 2x2 chart of positive femininity and negative femininity, and positive masculinity and negative masculinity. And right now we're operating under a source code, string of code that all masculinity is negative and all femininity is positive. I think really the from an incentive structure standpoint, from a game theory standpoint, like, there's no barrier to accusation. There's no barrier to false accusation.
That is true. Right? I wouldn't read too much into the kind of feminism that inspired this, because certainly a notion of endemic sexual assault on campus launched that dear colleague letter from the Obama administration in 2011. But it's the incentives that really propelled this into something else, namely a machinery that universities could punish faculty almost at will, a machinery that one student could use against students. Talk about, he didn't call you back? Title IX his ass, right? A way colleagues could lash out at one another, as happened in my case. Harvard now has 50 Title IX investigators. And when you have 50 investigators, they will investigate, right? So it's really a question of creating a machinery that universities could use in all sorts of ways.
It's like when we would be deployed, sometimes we'd have NCIS agents come by and come around, and it was well known that they're not there to be friends with you. They have, if they're not working, they don't have work, and budgets are all tied to that. So got to find a case. Let's make a case.
Yeah, one thing, that's an excellent point, because the military, love for our troops and all that, but is another example of one of these crazy bureaucracies. And I think because we're all patriots, we sometimes overlook this. But I mean, the military are the people that managed to spend $800 on a toilet seat. And the one time I looked into that case in law school, that wasn't turned over to the black budget for espionage. They just did that shit. So I mean, when you have these large,
I just read about that case. Will, and it's not literally that the expense for the toilet seat was $800, but it was calculated on an average based on all the man hours that were used in procurement in general. That's around the bureaucracy. So, but still, the point is the same. Military bureaucracy is deeply flawed.
I think we're actually making the same point. I mean, the in-game cost of purchasing the 900 or whatever it was,
fair enough.
Was like in the millions, and that's because you had to go through all of these different layers of useless bureaucracy. And
there's a great movie,
but these are guys I suspect didn't spend much time on a battlefield. So you've got these. When you hear there are I was talking with a Chinese friend recently, and I mentioned there are 3 million people across the U.S. Armed Services or whatever. And he said, well, in China, we've got about 6, but I assume you have the same problem we do, which is that 2/3 of ours don't do shit. They're people
Right.
in Beijing that are
Yep.
going to dinner with civil politicians and so on. Like, this is the number of soldiers we have. And I'd say yours is about 60% of that. And looking that up, that's probably correct. But another quick numerical point for Nick in the panel. When you say that there are 50 Title IX investigators, mostly at the executive level at Harvard, there are only 7,000 people at Harvard. They have a big grad school, some of which is on campus, but undergrad number 7,038. That's spring 2025. That's right now. So, I mean, there's one investigator for every 126 students or something like that. So, yeah, you're going to have to get busy. There aren't that many violent rapes at Harvard. So you're going to have to find someone who said a racial slur on the rugby pitch or someone that broke up with their girlfriend. And that's really, I think, the incentive there. Yeah.
Yep. 100%. But it's not just the undergrads. It's the grad students. It's the faculty. It's the staff. This kind of cases can be brought against anyone.
Okay, so actually, I have a very academia-specific question for you, Nick. I mean, I recently read the book The Fall of the Faculty. It's now a bit dated. But obviously, this is a book about how bureaucracy got started in the groves. Because the understanding of academia traditionally was, look, we're these very intelligent, competent people. We're professors, maybe a few coaches. But if someone needs to advise a kid on what major to go into, you should be able to do that in your office or over a game of golf or something like that. And the book explains how gradually universities began to hire these professional bureaucrats. It started with the president, started with the fundraiser, athletic director was a big one. We don't talk enough about the impact of athletics on the rest of the university. But I mean, the end of the book, by the way, is the faculty losing. Faculty senate's in a marginal role. 70% of the employees on campus don't have anything to do with teaching or coaching. Nick, have you seen this in your own career? How can universities get rid of these people? Michigan's diversity office, 119 people. Yeah. Funny to me as a U of I man, but how does it stop?
Yeah, how it stops, I mean, it's tough, right? Because certainly there have been a lot of reforms attempted to military bureaucracy, and some have worked and some haven't. And so getting rid of bureaucracy is tough. There's no magic bullet, but the problem is real. A story of experience I'll remember for the rest of my life. Some years ago, I was dating a woman who was an administrator at my university with the exotic title of controller. In other words, she was high up in the money end of the university. And so I went to her, the enterprise Christmas dinner with the enterprise staff. And the VP who ran the thing looked at me and said, I swear to God, I see we have a member of the enemy here tonight. And it was a joke, but it was a joke of a point, right? So there are a lot of bureaucrats. Certainly, when we see things like the Michigan, how many diversity bureaucrats Michigan had, that there's been a lot of great reporting in the Times by Nick Confessori on it. So I imagine that reforms are in progress, but there's some bureaucracy that we probably want. There's some bureaucracy the universities need, like development to raise funds and manage endowments. There's some that's nonsense, and how to tell the difference is hard when everyone, of course, wants to protect their turf.
Brooks, a question to you. I mean, you've had some experience managing bureaucracies. How do you get people out of a bureaucracy?
I mean, the type of people that worm into a bureaucracy are there largely because they, in my experience, are super risk averse. If they can get into the spot, they've got a pathway for life, impossible to fire. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of damage is done. We have administrative, cysts, like whole bag parasites in pretty much every institution. I mean, academia, military, HR, and the cost of that often gets transferred to the customer. I mean, particularly with regard to student loans. I mean, there's this common chart that shows products and services adjusted for inflation and which ones have stayed relatively, level, and electronics and those types have kind of gone down over time after R&D costs are recuperated. But university textbooks and healthcare, and I mean, healthcare has had a ballooning administrative function as well. So, yeah, I don't know, but I think before too long, we're going to have more administrators than anything else. And then what are you?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
that,
if I could answer that too, I think you have to get good administrators in there, right? So I don't think it's so much as a matter of getting the bad ones out necessarily, but it's you have to get good ones in to have like a balance. Because if you get a person in there and they start questioning everything and they start, kind of raising, hey, like, why are we doing it this way? And just putting a spotlight on things, that might help kind of even out, and that might weed out then some of the dysfunction, hopefully.
Well, at the state level, there was a reaction to another problem. So call that guardrail, left guardrail, or guardrail one, and then the result has just been this spiral away past the other guardrail. There was a lot of punitive action taken on the bureaucratic layer at the state level during an administration change. They had all kinds of corruption, particularly in Kentucky. They had a thing called the bagman. The bagman was the governor's bagman would go through every cabinet with a bag that you had to, if you're a government employee, you better be putting money into his reelection campaign. So that level of corruption. And so they built a system meant to, react to that controversy and that scandal, but then it's created the opposing guardrail, the opposing problem. So yeah. I think incentive structure, it all has to do with incentive structure has to be changed, and good administrators that Christy mentioned would have to come in and retool incentive structure to force productivity or out.
I think that's a good point, but a deeper question, I think, is almost Thomas Sowellian, right? I mean, there's some academic writers today that go into this as well, but to simplify it, the question is, do we need most of these people at all? And in kind of trade-off solution terms, are they better or worse than what came before them? I'd agree we need some basic bureaucracies. I recently read a good book on the progressive movement. I mean, at a certain point, you could sell rotten bacon fat as butter. No one could do anything about it. There weren't laws regulating food, wine, so on. But I mean, much beyond that, so for example, you have a certain rate of sexual violence and domestic violence in most communities of humans that everyone hates, but that's sort of endemic. You have bad failed marriages, so on. Traditionally, that's been dealt with by everything from divorce to people's brothers beating the asses of bad husbands. There have been a lot of social mechanisms in place. If you try to solve that, if you try to reduce that rate to zero by putting in a set of rules that in practice make it a Class A misdemeanor to ask someone out, you're probably doing more harm than good. So the question is, with a diversity bureaucracy, is there any positive value add there at all when you go past one guy? I mean, Nick, what do you think? Do colleges need departments of state diversity?
So there's been now research that shows that having a diversity dean does not make your university more diverse. Oh, yeah. Michigan doesn't need its $8 million budget of people. You need a couple of people. You need people at least to measure what the composition of the student body looks like, right? There are some forms of outreach to increase diversity that are probably agreeable to everyone on this panel. For example, the state of Texas, that if you are in the top 10% of your class in any high school in Texas, you can get into any Texas university you want. Okay. So what that does is that if the people at the poorly funded small Muslim minority high schools were competing with the whole state, they wouldn't get in. But if they're in the top 10%, they can get in. That's probably not objectionable to most of you.
I don't mind it. I mean,
yeah,
it's the practical question.
It's not seeking racial quotas. It's just seeking high school quotas.
Yeah, I think the practical issue with that is the score differences you'd get across schools. I'd probably vote for that if I was in Congress, but there's an element of, I went to East Aurora High School outside of Chicago, an entertaining, fairly tough school. But I mean, the SAT average was actually the northern states aren't that bad. It was 1,000 or something like that. But I mean, the wealthy school next door, Naperville North, that we played football against, the average of I think 1,300. So being in the top 10% at those two schools would be a very different thing. But I think there's actually a deeper question here. Looking at this written list of questions, so one of the issues that underlies a lot of this stuff that's going on in the university is the extreme monoculture there. I mean, Nick, you don't strike me as a hard right, dissident, Trump voting type, really. But I mean, in academia, you would be in the probably the furthest right 15% of people, something like that. I mean, in my field of political science, I think there are 38 Democrats and Greens for every one Republican on campus. Again, for you and for the panel, how'd that happen, and how do you fix that? Is that fixable?
One feature of the book that I'm proud of is that there are conservative contributors who are punished in some cases for their politics, and progressive contributors who are punished for theirs. So just having the right politics doesn't mean you won't be investigated, because whatever your politics are, you can always find someone to be offended. And indeed, my case were non-political. So that's a different problem. One of the best books I've read by it is by am I blanking on his name because I'm old? From Colby. Anyhow, he's a book called "Why Are Professors Liberal and Why Do We Care?" And he basically comes down to the notion that it's very self-selected, right? That's why the professoriate leans so far left. And that, I think, will increasingly be the case now that conservatives, the GOP, is a low education party in America, whereas until about 2012, 2014, the GOP was the higher education party. But it's self-selected. He did report the results of a field experiment he ran to see if he could find discrimination, where he sent letters of inquiry to a grad program director, and some letters were coded progressive, talking about volunteering for the Obama campaign. Others were coded Republican, talking about volunteering for the McCain campaign, and to see if there was a difference in the level of attention these letters got. There was not. I won't say there isn't some discrimination against conservatives on campus. I know I've worked with a couple of conservatives, but I think it's self-selection is a lot of it.
It's definitely possible that conservatives would be more interested in making money, so on.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that
there's probably some correlation to, Big Five, trade openness, conscientiousness. The conscientious people are outrunning the business, and the trade openness people are curious.
Possibly. I mean, I think that's a good point. They're at some level, though. I mean, I think it would be pretty difficult to go through like most Big Ten sociology programs as a right-wing white male. And I think people are pretty aware of that. I mean, if you look at I think liberals are now 1 IQ point on average ahead of conservatives, which is very much not what you've seen in the past. But I mean, if you really want to bring up the kind of dubious large group IQ scores, I mean, there'd be much larger differences between, say, Hispanics and Asians, or blacks and whites, or something. And I think most universities try really, really hard to get a proportional number of African American faculty or something like that. Christy, what do you think?
I'm laughing because to myself, because you said he sent the letters out, McCain. So I would say anybody that lives in Arizona, I would say, that is a kinder, gentler, more acceptable Republican. I think a better test would be, if he sent it out nowadays with like Trump or, maybe even Bush. But McCain is definitely, he always has been kind of acceptable to the left and the right.
Except in WA.
He was the Republican presidential candidate at the era that study was conducted.
It's an interesting question.
I think in general, conservatives will complain about institutions. So we'll complain about government, we'll complain about the bureaucrats, we'll complain about the universities, but then we don't go there and try to make, a difference with our conservative values. We'd rather just shun them. And I don't think that that's going to be, I mean, we're going to have doctors that are, on both sides of the spectrum. We're going to have lawyers, whatever. So I think that conservatives need to, enter the field and just stop so much damn complaining.
It's an interesting question. Like, I'm sure that I've said that like 4 times, like it's some brilliant insight, but I mean, I'm sure that if you were to look at lawyers, police detectives, surgeons, a whole bunch of different fields, preachers, they would either lean right or they would be fairly evenly split ideologically. And Christy, I don't really think necessarily think you disagree
That's
with that.
actually not. That's not true, actually. So certainly fields like cops and firefighters lean right, but of the professions, of the things you need advanced degrees to get, they're all overwhelmingly left. Whether it's
Lawyers
law
were
school,
47 Republican, 50 Democrat last year.
no longer. Not if you look into law schools. Not if you look at what
That's
the
practicing
students.
lawyers as of 2024. You're saying law students are very different now?
Yeah, those are the data. I can dig up the data, but they look much different. So for academia is an extreme case, but all of the professions are now tilting left.
That's extremely bizarre. I mean, like there are some minor intellectual differences. And Nick, you might correct this, but every time I've looked at Democrat, Republican, or even liberal conservative IQ data, the split's 3 points or less, something like that. That's before an adjustment for Southern residency, more conservatives in the South. So it doesn't seem plausible. Like, it's not plausible that the reason rich Republican guys aren't trying to become lawyers is that they're too dumb. I mean,
Well,
like,
no,
you could look at them.
No, I didn't.
I'm not saying you're saying that, Nick.
I said nothing of the sort.
Of course not. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what I'm saying is that, like, obviously there's something going on, whether that's perceived bias in the institutions, whether that is, I mean, there is some selectivity difference in field sociology and so on are fairly small, though. I mean, but is there bias against the right? Brooks, what do you think?
I think some of this is plowman versus philosopher, right? Like there are plenty of intelligent conservatives that own their own plumbing business. And there is some value to that. And, I try to keep one foot in both camps, right? Because the value of a carpenter is their work gets judged immediately by the level, right? The plumber gets judged immediately by reality if his fittings are not watertight. Whereas it's a little less, there's a bit of a lag with regard to theory and what comes of it in academia. So I think that there are some differences there. Jefferson had the quote, if you want the better philosophical answer and between the philosopher and the plowman, ask the plowman. And so I think a lot of conservatives view the education claim in the U.S. as we were all kind of coming up, that if you go and get your college education, you'll have a better life and better opportunities. I think a lot of them turned away from that. And I think the market proved them somewhat right. I believe the university and a liberal university education in the traditional sense as a general education, and in a critical thought development experience is really valuable, but I don't view most university experiences that anymore.
I would argue that, no, you're absolutely right, Brooks. The market has validated that the four-year college degree is not the route to prosperity, and political leaders in both parties for too long cast it as such. Let me, the book I was mentioning earlier about the liberal conservative divide in academia is by Neil Gross. Let me drop in one more book, a book called Passing on the Right, which is a book by conservative scholars about conservative scholars about their experiences in the academy. And they recount some discrimination, but not pervasive. It's a good read. It's you'd be interested in that book, Will.
Yeah, so I actually looked up some of this as it looks like you or some of you guys did while we were talking. The lawyers thing seems to be really interesting in terms of distribution. So law students, even now, and most people get more conservative as they get older, lean less than 55% to the left. But the ideological tilt is mostly extreme among elite lawyers, with liberals making up 76% of recent graduates of elite law schools, and it looks like they can find that to the top 14. So there's a whole weird breakdown going on. Like in general, liberals and conservative Democrats and Republicans, I don't find the other terms that useful all the time, have about equal intelligence, but there seems to be either a perception that aspects of elite American society, like entertainment law, leans about 95% to the left, are for one faction. Agriculture, by the way, according to some of the same results, leans about 80% to the right. So there seems to be this clumping of professions and businesses as one or the other, at least at the top. And I would assume that probably based on how humans are, that combines with some prejudice within those fields. You know, if you're a detective level police officer and you're in the station and you're a Pete Buttigieg voter, how's that going to go for you on a daily basis? I don't know. Christy is a lawyer.
Like to think your fellow cops would just hope you could get the job done, but
well, I think that.
Yeah.
But Christy, what do you think?
I think we're going to see that gap widen because if you look at right now, especially among the far right, you know, if you look at what Charlie Kirk is preaching and, you know, all Matt Walsh, they're at college, you know, don't go, they're blatantly telling kids, don't go to college. It's a waste of time. It's a scam. Well,
No,
I mean,
that's not.
You know,
at the same time, you do have Austin University. You've got Peterson's doing his own thing, Peterson Academy. I do see another schism on the right. Like we've talked about this a lot. The left is typically, well, in recent years, fairly uniform across those lines, and the right, whether you're talking about business with China or with regard to the efficacy of academia, another schism, another one.
Yeah, one sentence description of this actually would be that what I see offhand is a radical shifting of the positions of the parties, where the Democrats, the left, probably even more so the Greens, are becoming the party of the rich and then the poor, basically, the lower working class and below. The Republicans now seem to be picking up a lot more of that populist center, so 54% of Hispanic males. Like, I would guarantee you that in business, what you would find is that Fortune 500 employees lean dramatically to the left. Then as you go down like F2000 through your plumbing business, hard to the right. And then people that are just employees thinking about joining the union, hard to the left again. That 100%, that's what you would see. Good, bad, it sort of is what it is.
We just did a game on this in my business class, right? We examined Pareto and we looked at the fact that Coca-Cola has 50% of the market share and Pepsi has 25% and Keurig Dr. Pepper has 12.5%, and then everybody else shares that 12.5%. The question is, if you're Coca-Cola, do you want shares to go from Pepsi to Keurig Dr. Pepper or from Keurig Dr. Pepper to Pepsi? And there's this natural incentive, if you're at the top of Pareto, to have the churn be captured from the middle, away from the middle, from the bottom. And so that this creates a natural alliance of the top and bottom against the middle. So I think that's what's playing out.
Yeah, that ties into a lot of other issues like immigration, I would say, you know, on the basis of no data right now. But I mean, like, are you going to bring in more people that you think would support you as versus those goddamn yeomen you spend all day arguing with? That's a problem that goes back to the Byzantine Empire. But all right, we generally do these for almost exactly a 1 hour block. I guess, Nick, you've done a lot of research, most of it good. I've read a lot of it. How would you summarize, half-assed question,
well,
but how would you summarize that?
What the bad research is.
Yeah, most of it was good.
I'm going to pull up a list of articles. Like, I think there's some methodological issues here. But no, you've written extensively on marriage. You devoted a book to marriage patterns almost entirely in Black and Latino communities. What are some of the major findings there? Apologies, really, that this is a quicker question, but divorce rates seem to be dropping. Marriage seems to be good, which is a pretty radical finding in academia. What are your thoughts?
We've known that marriage is good for a long time. I mean, since Linda Waite first, the Chicago sociologist, published a presidential address along those lines in 1995. It was she was
not to interrupt. The
to
last article I read on marriage in the Times, not in some radical right-wing paper, was something like, "We can't have families and see a feminist future." I mean, so maybe the misinterpretations of the research and popular.
That's an op-ed, though, right? the genre of that drove me nuts were the people complaining about marriage during COVID, and when it was just clear that the reporter was sick to death of her wife or his husband during spending COVID in some 400 square foot apartment in Park Slope, and that led them to start questioning marriage. But so, yes, sure, there's some of that at elite. Yeah, elite opinion sometimes has these contrary views. At the same time, they're the ones much more likely to be married. I think it's pretty clear that marriage is a social good. That one of the biggest stories in recent years is what a class divide there is. 40 years ago, it didn't matter how much, whether you had a college degree or not, you're equally likely to be married, equally likely to divorce. Now, if you have a 4-year college degree, you'll probably get married and stay married. If you don't have a college degree, you're far less likely to get married and you're more likely to get divorced if you are. That's a big problem. That's a big source of inequality in American society.
Okay, great stuff. Now we always close with a word of wisdom from the panel, usually about 5 to 8 minutes of words of wisdom. Do any of you guys want to give a word of wisdom first? Do you want me to do it?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll respond to Nick's point. I think, again, that it's good to hear the general consensus around the idea of marriage is good, so on. I don't necessarily agree that some of these ideas in public are as universally agreed on among reporters or academics as you might say there. I think most people know them. And this is a great recent study about, well, this actually is something we should have talked about too late, but 88% of university students say they've shifted their expressed positions to be 1, more polite, which I don't object to, but 2, more liberal in just Big Ten campuses. This wasn't even the Ivies. So you see this a lot with discussions of the family so on. But my basic point, I think that brings up the issue of luxury beliefs, which gets into a lot of this. Like every single ex-raver girl I know from the University of Chicago, Northwestern Illinois, Michigan, Southern Illinois, so on, is now happily married to a rich guy. So most people who hear this stuff go to a top college, listen to it a little bit. One professor's a communist, another's a former soldier. It bounces off and they proceed on to do the things that they wanted to do in life. I think the negative impact of these ideas is felt further down in neighborhoods like the one I used to live in, where people listen to the pop culture that comes from that. All the songs like Single Ladies, Independent, Don't Need No Man. These are 3 separate number 2 hits, and believe that. And in that culture, for a variety of other reasons, the fatherlessness rate at birth for Black kids, 69%, all kids, 45%. So I think that's where you see the impact. And I think that we who do shape culture should be aware, not to sound like everyone's scolding dad, of the impact on society overall of the things we seem to be saying. And that doesn't describe Nick's work at all, which is good, but it's something I see a lot. Some happily married feminist whose husband is a bond trader will say things like, well, we really don't need them, though. From, as you said, Park Slope. All right. Christy Kelly, next word of wisdom. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely thank you for coming. Thank you for the book. So I did read, quite a bit of it. So I suggest everybody definitely go out and get it. It was interesting seeing everyone's, individual stories and how they were brought up on, some of them very frivolous matters and how the system is kind of being used against them. So I would just say for conservatives, for those that are in the middle, don't surrender, whether it's your city government or it's your universities, all of these, bureaucracies that we, rail about, don't just surrender them to the left. Get in there, hold your nose when you have to, and, try to push it a little bit more towards the sane way of operating. But that would be my advice.
That's a great note, actually. I mean, the right has a lot of good points, the left has some good points, but like on the right, you can't win if you just sit around bitching. Like if your advice for young men is not even join the army, but like go repair radiators in Alaska, live the nomadic life, the sort of stuff you see on social media, those people are not going to become the leaders of the market in the next generation. Brooks Crenshaw, what's your WOW?
Well, so I want to build on what Christy said, because I agree with it wholeheartedly as a fairly right person who's ventured into academia to teach the next generation. I'll tie this back to 2016, right? When the Trump campaign was happening, I was not pleased. I was pleased with the outcome of the election. I didn't have to vote for anybody in that state because I was in a very red state that was going to go the way, so I didn't have to do that. But I didn't like a lot of the behavior that I saw, and I thought it wasn't quote unquote presidential. And then about a year into his presidency, it dawned on me. Electorates get the representation they deserve. Like these candidates are a reflection of us. And so I really believe that if you want better representation, particularly if you're on the right, that has to be done upstream. Electorates have to be informed, and somebody has to inform them. So yeah, I completely agree with Christy. Nick, thanks for coming on. Some of your experience sounds harrowing, from your Anakin Skywalker tenure process to everything else. So glad to have you on, man. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you to the three of you for having me. For my word of wisdom, thank you for on your pod. For my word of wisdom, let me respond to something you said, Will, that there was a great piece by James Q. Wilson in City Weekly about 20 years ago making just this point, that beliefs entertained by the top of society, will cause damage at the bottom where people don't have the resources to stabilize them. Please, as your academic guest and token shitlib, let me make a plea for the defense of the universities. Despite all the problems, people still want to come from all over the world to American higher education. We have the best of it. And it's also American higher education that's helped fuel the greatest economy that humanity's ever known.
Boom. As an American patriot, not going to respond to that. Thank you, Nick Wolfinger, for coming on. Great discussion. Solid ending defense of American education, which really is the envy of the world. What's the old line, Nick? There are 5 ranked universities in Prussia, and that would be Germany. I guess there are 10 in Germany total, and there are 22 in Ohio. So, I mean, that's one of the things America really does have to be proud of. Thank you, Nick Wolfinger, for coming on. Professor Speak Out, Truth About Campus Investigations. Go buy the book and have a great day.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.